One of them talked to the victim, found out that we were dealing with an aggravated assault domestic case. There were some people outside that pointed where the suspect went, and so the other officers started to find him. Once they kind of got, I guess they found him, and he took off running, and so there was a chase. Right around that time, we had a canine officer, or I guess a canine handler, and his dog had just finished up a demonstration, and he heard this traffic on the radio that there was a foot pursuit taking place. He called to check and find out the reason for that chase. They don't always get involved in these foot pursuits. He had really finished his point of when he was working, and so he was, I suppose, heading back home. He wasn't on shift at that point in time. He found out it was an aggravated assault domestic case, which is a felony. And there's some, I guess, different criteria that they meet when they're going to be called out or be pressed into service. And so that's one of them. Anytime it's a felony and we have a serious assault. So he was right in that area, and so he responded with his canine, and then they got involved in the pursuit. The foot pursuit went through several different backyards. Eventually, the canine was able to find the suspect, and he was trying to hide in a window well. I think everybody's probably seen the video that kind of kicks in at this point in time, but we have to remember from the canine handler's point of view, he knew that there was an aggravated assault domestic. He didn't know what the nature of that was. He didn't have any details of that. He just knew that we had a felony assault that had taken place. Those felony assaults, those aggravated assaults, can also include weapons, and we see that frequently where a knife or a gun is used or threatened. And so we had the suspect that was hiding in the window well. He pulled the canine back and was giving him orders. The guy came up and sat on the edge of the window well and wasn't following any directions. The officer was telling him to get down, to lay down. He didn't know if the guy had any weapons on him. He didn't know if there was any weapons that may have been hidden in the window well. He didn't know the circumstances that led up to this, where he was there. He was just there to assist in this felony arrest. One of the things, and there's a lot of comments, I'm sure everybody has seen those as well, but they're concerned that the officer kicked the guy, what people are perceiving as no reason. The officer thought that the guy was getting ready to jump back into that window well. He didn't know what was in that window well. He didn't know if the guy was going to try to break through the window and get into that house, didn't know who was inside that house. A lot of people, it's easy for them to second guess after the fact without having the information that the officer had at that time. The officer tried to kick the guy backwards away from the window well, and you could actually see him pulling the guy back. The canine did what it's supposed to do. The guy had been given many instructions to lay down or he was going to be bit. The canine, as part of their apprehension training, that's what they do. And so when he kicked the guy back and then started dragging him, the guy kind of rolled over on his stomach and put his hands underneath of him. Again, the officer didn't know if he had any weapons on him or hidden about him. The dog latched onto him, and the officers were then able to finally get his hands out from underneath of him and then get him handcuffed. The suspect in this case did have some wounds from that bite. He was taken to the hospital and received a few stitches. I don't know the exact number, but did get some stitches from that. He was treated at the hospital and then released, and then he was taken to jail. Do you want his name before we start with the questions? His last name is, I'm not sure how to say this, Ites, I-T-E-S. First is Dylan, D-Y-L-A-N. Middle is Keith, K-E-I-T-H. And he's 27 from Sioux Falls.
How old was the victim?
The victim is 29, also from Sioux Falls. The charges he had were aggravated assault domestic, interference with emergency communication, resisting arrest, and fleeing police.
What's the interference?
That's the 911. When she tried to make that 911 call, and he was the one that disconnected that, and he kept her phone to prevent her from calling 911 again or another time.
What was the one after communication?
resisting arrest, and fleeing police. One of the things I'll add with this is anytime a canine bites somebody, that's considered a use of force. And really, the short of it is anytime police use force to effect an arrest, there is a report that gets done. That report gets sent to our professional standards, which is another name for internal affairs. They do a complete review to find out if that was an appropriate use of force. So that's anything from an officer punching somebody, kicking somebody, pepper spray, taser, the canine, all the way up to deadly force. So anytime in this situation is certainly no different. Since the dog was used, there'll be a report and there'll be an internal review to find out if that was an appropriate amount of force.
Do you know how long he had been giving the suspect commands before he released the dog? Because it doesn't appear like a very long amount of time in the video.
Well, one of the things you have to remember, though, is the officers stopped or tried to stop him before he took off running from them at that point in time. It's pretty obvious he wasn't going to listen to any commands that the officers were giving. That doesn't alleviate us from at least trying to get somebody to comply with that. Most of the time, especially if there's a canine there that's barking, people realize what's going to happen and they choose to follow those directions. In this case, for whatever reason, he chose to ignore the officers. I'd have to go back and listen to that again, but I think that there was probably at least 5 times that the officer was saying, you know, come out, lay down on the ground, put your hands behind your back, giving those same commands over and over and over, along with warning that if he didn't comply, he was going to get bit. So there's no set number, but certainly he gave them this, you know, this guy the opportunity to come out and comply with those directions.
Well, we only see the video from the point that he rolls. How long had that exchange been going on?
That I don't know. Yeah.
It had been going on for a while? Before the video?
I think the video, I think it was pretty, if I remember right at the beginning of the video, I think you see the canine handler pull the canine back. So it's probably soon after the canine found him hiding in that window well. So I think you're probably hearing all the commands that he gave. And, you know, the distance for the camera and the sound isn't exactly the best. But, I mean, you get the idea that you can hear him saying, you know, come out, come out, come out. And, I mean, the guy does stand up and sit on the window well, and so he knows the officer's there, and you can certainly hear the dog barking.
So the canine and the handler, you said, were just hearing the foot traffic over, I mean, you don't think that they were underprepared for the situation or anything like that?
No, I mean, they do demonstrations. The canines, they go out to all kinds of different places and groups and do demonstrations on the capabilities, and they're very well received. They always head out with everything like they would be heading to work. So he wasn't going to work per se. It wasn't like he was going to work a shift on the street, but he still had everything like he would on a normal circumstance. And that's why he heard that on the radio, his police radio, heard that pursuit taking place, and that's why he asked, you know, what was going on.
I mean, like the details of how he handled the situation. I mean, you don't think that he was up to speed, is what you're saying.
I guess I'm not understanding your question.
He didn't do anything wrong in the way that he handled the situation. I mean, he had information about the situation.
Right.
going on.
Well,
Was that related to, did he just hear it over the?
he heard it over the police radio that there was that chase. And then he found out that it was a felony, which is one of the reasons that they can get involved in with the canine. As far as whether he did anything right or wrong, that's going to be our professional standards that will review everything and make that determination.
Did the suspect end up having any weapons?
No, he did not. You know, as we kind of talked about before, it was those 3 different strangulations or choking her, to put it in a phrase that other people maybe understand better. But essentially it's the same thing. Strangulation is restricting somebody's breathing. Obviously she did not die from this, but the potential was there. But no, he did not have any weapons on him.
How serious were the victim's injuries?
You know, that's a tough one for me to say.
Was she taken to the hospital?
She refused medical treatment at the time. I don't know if she sought it out afterwards on her own. An ambulance came and checked her out, and she was kind of on the fence, I think, whether she wanted to go to the hospital or not. In the end, she decided that she was probably going to be okay. I think she had the officer noted that she had quite a few red marks on her neck and then her arms. There may have been other injuries as well. I mean, if we're going to classify it, it's going to be probably non-life-threatening injuries, but the way bruising happens, the couple of days after are probably worse than immediately right when it happens. So, she's going to be okay, I think is the end of it, but the potential for, extremely serious injuries was there.
The dog seems to be praised in the video for its work. Is that common?
That's one of the things that they do to help reinforce the training that the dog does. We don't want, they have regular training, and the handlers are encouraging them to do that training that they're supposed to do. And so we don't want them to get gun shy, I suppose. Maybe that's a bad phrase, but we don't want them to regress and move away from that training. If they're doing something that they're supposed to do, that's why he's giving those words of encouragement. It's not to be more aggressive. It's not to continue to attack somebody when they don't need it. The handler, once the guy was secured, pulls the dog off and then move the dog away out of that situation. The dog wasn't necessarily needed there anymore, and once he was in handcuffs, and so that's why he leads him away. But we saw a lot of comments about that too, about people hearing the handler encourage them, but it's just to reinforce that he's doing the right thing.
The dog did what it was trained to do.
The dog did exactly what it was trained to do. I hate putting this back on the suspect in this situation, but that's really what it comes down to. The handler told him, you need to do this or you're going to be bit. The dog, they're not able to reason as far as we are in situations like that. They just know there's a guy, I need to go get him. And if the handler lets him go, he's going to do that to essentially affect that arrest to make sure. Like I said, we have a lot of situations, maybe a lot's too much, but we have situations where people, once they're confronted with that dog and they hear that dog bark, they know what's going to come if they don't listen, if they don't follow those instructions. And so you follow them, the dog gets walked away back to the patrol car, and there's no issues after that.
I think some of the comments, it looked like that people were like, well, he's already down because he was sitting on the ground.
But if you look close, you don't see his hands either. A lot of people will have weapons in their front waistband or in their pockets, and we don't know what those are. Until police have searched somebody to make sure they don't have weapons, we really treat everybody as if they have weapons, just because we don't know. There's been a lot of different situations that officers come across where you may not think somebody is armed, and all of a sudden they pull out a gun or they pull out a knife. There's those different situations, and so that's a dangerous I keep saying situation, but that's a dangerous situation, is if somebody has their hands underneath their body, we don't know what they're doing with it. And so the idea is, hopefully, they're going to listen and follow the directions that the officers give, and all of that is really designed to make sure that people are safe, including the officers and the suspect.
I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but how often are canines deployed, I guess?
Deployed, I can't, I don't know if we have records for that, because they're cross-trained for a lot of different things. They've got tracking, they've got the apprehension, and we've got drugs.
I guess is it typical for how often do you see a canine actually use force?
Not very often, I think, is probably a good way of saying it. I know we've had canines that have apprehended people in the past. It doesn't seem to happen, I don't think, that frequently. I don't have exact numbers on that, but I think that's probably something we track. I think in this instance, though, I know in this instance this was the first apprehension with this canine handler and canine.
Does an officer have to be put on any sort of leave when this is investigated?
No, I think well, in our policy, I think the only time where they're put on leave is if deadly force is used. Anything else is, like I said, that internal review or professional standards are looking at that to find out if this was an appropriate use of force or not.
Do you know the canine's name?
Yeah, I think it is Spike. Yep, Spike.
Comments
In
on
the
it?
interest of transparency, I mean, like, will we eventually know what the report says, yea or nay, justified or not justified? Or?
I think we put that stuff on our website, to be honest.
I mean, I know it'll take a while, but
Right.
eventually.
Yeah, I think, I'm pretty sure all that stuff goes up on our website, so, I mean, I don't see any reason, I don't know if if there's some disciplinary action, I don't know that we would know the results of that, but whether it was justified or not justified, I don't think there's any issue with that, but I'd have to check to make sure.
Did the man have any sort of previous domestic violence history with the victim, or was there any sort of?
Yeah,
protection?
I can't go into the history of that, but I can give you more information afterwards.
Do you happen to know if he's gonna be in court today?
I would guess, I don't
Is he at
know.
the hospital though?
Yeah, he was treated and released right away. So that Friday afternoon, he was in jail. I don't know if I'm guessing he probably will make his first court appearance today. I don't know if this is gonna. Yes, he will.